You probably think this is a simple story of a rising power challenging an established one. It's not really about trade deficits or who makes the most computer chips. And the real reason has almost nothing to do with political ideologies. Look, we need to peel back about 50 years of history to see the starting point. Honestly, can you even remember a time when the US and China weren't rivals? That relationship was built on a single, powerful assumption. America believed China would eventually become more like it. That was the fundamental bargain, you know? Economic integration would lead to political change. It was a bet on the future character of a nation. But what happens when that bet spectacularly fails? The money flowed and factories moved across the Pacific. American consumers got cheaper goods, that's true. Chinese workers got jobs and a path out of poverty. For decades, this was called a win-win situation. So when did the winning start to feel like losing? The first cracks weren't in the South China Sea or over Taiwan. They appeared in American factory towns and industrial heartlands. Communities were hollowed out, but the math still seemed to work. The economic theory said this was just efficient global capitalism. The political reality, though, was quietly festering. Then came the year 2001, a true turning point. China joined the World Trade Organization, opening the floodgates. The scale of what happened next was simply unimaginable. China didn't just participate in the global system, it began to dominate entire sections of it. This wasn't just about making toys and t-shirts anymore. They moved ruthlessly up the value chain. So what's the problem with a country getting better at making things? The conflict isn't about making things, but controlling the means of future power. Think about the technologies that will define the next century. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology. Whoever leads these fields will set the rules for everyone else. That's the stakes we're talking about now. It's a race for foundational technological supremacy. The US looked up and saw a competitor it had itself created. Here's an uncomfortable question. Did America accidentally build its own greatest rival? The original plan lacked a crucial long-term safeguard. Technology transfer was baked into the relationship from day one. American companies, seeking profit, took their know-how to China. They trained engineers, shared blueprints, and built advanced facilities. It was a shortcut to growth that China mastered perfectly. This wasn't espionage, though that happened too. It was business conducted in plain sight. The Chinese state, however, always had a different playbook. Its companies, even private ones, served national strategic goals. The goal was never just wealth, but independence and dominance, and that goal is fundamentally at odds with American expectations. You see, the US assumed the global order it built was permanent. China sees that same order as something to be reshaped. This isn't a personal grudge or a clash of civilizations. It's a structural collision between two different visions of the future. One wants to preserve the system as it is. The other believes the system is fundamentally rigged against it. So, is this just a typical power transition, like Britain handing the baton to America? Look, that historical analogy is dangerously misleading. The US and the UK shared a deep cultural and political kinship. Their rivalry was within the same basic framework of rules. The US and China are operating from entirely different rulebooks. One system is decentralized, with power spread across corporations and institutions. The other concentrates strategic direction in a way the West finds hard to even see. This difference makes the competition uniquely prone to miscalculation. You know, we often talk about a Thucydides trap, where war becomes inevitable. But what if the real trap is economic interdependence? They're so deeply tangled that disentangling them might cause a global shock. Every smartphone, every appliance, every car relies on this connected supply chain. So how do you decouple from your biggest trading partner? The answer is you can't, not quickly or cleanly. The attempt itself becomes a source of constant friction and uncertainty. Think about those tariffs that started a few years back. Politicians sold them as a tool to bring manufacturing home. Honestly, did they? The trade imbalance didn't vanish. It just shifted to other countries. And American companies and consumers ended up paying the bills. The pain was real, but the strategic gain was unclear. Here's the curiosity hook. The real battlefield isn't in the tariff lists. It's in the obscure, standard-setting bodies that govern global technology. Who decides how 5G networks operate or how data flows across borders? These are the dry, technical forums where the future is actually being carved up. And China has been showing up to these meetings for decades with a unified plan. The US and its allies often show up with competing corporate interests. That's a massive, underappreciated advantage. So, is this conflict really America versus China? It's more accurate to say it's a conflict of systems. The West's system prizes individual innovation and market chaos. China's model is about state-directed mobilization toward national goals. One is a marathon of countless runners. The other is a single coordinated team. Which is more effective in a long-term technological race? We're about to find out. The American response lately has been to cut off access. Blocking semiconductor sales is the most dramatic example. It's an attempt to slam the door on a critical technology, but history shows that blockades often fuel a desperate kind of innovation. Could this pressure actually accelerate China's drive for self-sufficiency? Many analysts inside China believe it already has. That push for self-sufficiency changes everything about the global economy. It means China is building parallel systems for everything from data to finance. They're creating a digital ecosystem that operates by different rules. And much of the developing world is being offered a seat at that table. So this isn't just a bilateral fight anymore. It's a contest for global alignment. But let's pause for a second and look at the human element inside China. For decades, the Communist Party's legitimacy was built on delivering economic growth. A rising tide of prosperity kept public focus away from political questions. Now, growth is slowing and the population is aging rapidly. The social contract is under new pressure. Nationalism and technological triumph become even more crucial pillars of support. This internal pressure makes compromise with the West far more difficult. You see, backing down can look like weakness to a domestic audience. So, is the Chinese leadership actually boxed in by its own people? In a way, yes, and that's a dangerously overlooked factor. Now flip the perspective and look at American politics. The U.S. stance toward China is one of the few issues with bipartisan agreement, but that agreement is shallow. It's only on the fact that China is a problem. The solutions from the left and the right are wildly different. One side talks about investing at home and building alliances. The other leans more toward aggressive containment and decoupling. This creates a chaotic stop-start policy that confuses allies and adversaries alike. Honestly, can a democracy execute a coherent, decades-long strategy against a focused rival? It's an open question, and it keeps strategists in Beijing up at night. They're betting the answer is no. They're counting on the short-term cycles of American politics to give them openings. And you know what? They've been right more often than you might think. So we have two giants, each convinced the other is in decline. The US sees China's demographic and debt problems as fatal. China sees American political division and infrastructure as signs of decay. Both are partially right, and that mutual perception of weakness is incredibly volatile. It makes each side think time might not be on their side. That encourages more aggressive now or never moves. Think about the military buildup in the Pacific. It's not really about invasion, it's about denial. China wants the ability to push American forces so far away that they can't intervene. The US is determined to prove that it can and will stick around. This is a slow-motion game of chicken played with aircraft carriers. But the most likely flashpoint isn't a deliberate war. It's an accident, a mistake, made in the fog of close encounters. A pilot misjudges, a ship takes a risky maneuver, and suddenly we're in a crisis. And with trust at zero, how do you de-escalate? That's the real danger everyone should be losing sleep over. The lack of a reliable emergency hotline between the militaries is frankly terrifying. Yet, the economic ties make a full-scale war seem almost irrational. So we're stuck in this gray zone of constant friction. It's a cold war, but one where the economies are fused together. That fusion creates a powerful, strange form of deterrence. But it also creates vulnerabilities that are being weaponized. Look at the concept of supply chain resilience. It's a bland term for a terrifying realization. Entire industries like pharmaceuticals depend on a single country for key ingredients. What happens if that flow is interrupted, not by war, but by a political decision? That's a form of power that doesn't require firing a single shot. So, is the real conflict being fought with export controls and investment reviews? In many ways, yes, and it's a war most people never see. The US is slowly tightening a noose of technology restrictions. It's not just chips, it's software, manufacturing equipment, and even talent. The goal is to create a high-tech moat. But China isn't just sitting inside the walls. It's pouring billions into basic scientific research, the kind that pays off in 30 years. They're trying to leapfrog the existing technological paradigm entirely. What if they crack fusion energy or a fundamental AI breakthrough first? The entire balance of power would shift overnight. That's the long game happening right under our noses. You know, we focus so much on governments, but what about the people? There's been a dramatic collapse in mutual goodwill. Chinese students and researchers in America feel growing suspicion. American businesses in China feel the welcome mat has been pulled away. This human bridge is crumbling, and that might be the hardest thing to rebuild. It creates a world where caricatures replace understanding. And in that world, miscalculation becomes so much easier. So, is there a way out of this? Honestly, the path back to partnership is closed. The trust is gone, and it won't come back in our lifetimes. The best case scenario now is something called managed competition. It means building clear guardrails to prevent a disaster. It means agreeing on some basic rules for AI and warfare, for instance. But even that minimal level of cooperation feels like a distant dream. The alternative is a world permanently divided into two technological spheres. You'd have an internet, a currency system, and a set of standards for the West. And you'd have a parallel version for much of the global South led by China. Your phone, your apps, your money might not work when you cross that digital border. That's the balkanized future that's already taking shape. It's inefficient, it's costly, and it slows down global progress. But to the powers that be, control now trumps efficiency. That, right there, is the tragic core of this whole story. The real reason for the conflict is a failed bet on convergence. Both sides gambled and both lost. Now, we're all living with the consequences of that lost wager. The consequences are a world that feels less stable and more expensive every day. Inflation, for instance, isn't just about pandemic spending or stimulus checks. A big part of it is the cost of untangling those hyper-efficient supply chains. Companies are building redundant factories in different countries, and you're paying for it. This is the hidden tax of the new great power rivalry. But who actually benefits from this new arrangement? Look, a certain class of manufacturers in places like Vietnam or Mexico might gain. Some workers in reshored industries might see new jobs. Yet the overall pie of global growth is almost certainly shrinking. We're prioritizing security over abundance. That's a historic shift. So, is this conflict making anyone truly richer, or just differently secure? The financial markets are starting to price in this permanent fracture. Investment money is cautiously retreating behind new geopolitical lines. Pension funds and big asset managers are quietly recalculating risks. They're asking if it's even safe to hold long-term investments in certain countries. That chilling effect on capital is a slow-moving crisis. It means less money for innovation and growth in vast parts of the world. Now, let's talk about a topic that feels abstract but is utterly central. Data. Data is the new oil, right? But it's more than that. It's the fuel for the AI that will define the next era. China has a massive advantage in sheer volume of structured data from its society. Its relative lack of privacy protections is a perverse competitive edge in AI training. The US has an advantage in cutting-edge algorithms and hardware for now. This sets up a fundamental clash over the future of the internet itself. Will it be an open, if messy, network? Or will it be a series of controlled, sovereign digital territories? The battle over TikTok is just the first public skirmish in that much larger war. It's easy to see all this and feel a sense of fatalism. But history isn't a straight line, and nations aren't monolithic blocks. There are powerful forces within China that crave stability and access to global science. There are powerful voices in America that warn against costly overreach and a new Cold War. Internal debates on both sides are fierce, even if we don't always see them. A change in leadership, a major internal crisis, or a shared global threat could alter the calculus. Could climate change, for example, force a reluctant collaboration? Perhaps, but it would be a marriage of pure necessity, not trust. The tragic irony is that the world's two most powerful countries are least able to cooperate on its biggest problems. They're too busy watching each other. So what does winning even look like in this conflict? For America, it's preserving its technological edge and the alliance system it built. For China, it's achieving strategic autonomy in a world where it sets the rules in its region. Notice that these goals aren't directly mutually exclusive on paper. The danger is in the pursuit, where one side's gain is seen as the other's intolerable loss. That's the spiral we're in. The real reason for the conflict isn't hate or even greed. It's fear. Fear of decline, fear of containment, fear of losing control over destiny. And fear, honestly, is a much harder adversary to reason with. That fear is now embedded in the institutions and daily decisions of both nations. So, where does this leave the rest of the world? Countries from Brazil to Saudi Arabia are facing an uncomfortable choice. But look, many are refusing to choose at all. They're playing both sides, extracting benefits from the US and China. This is called multi-alignment, and it's the new normal for middle powers. They get investment from Beijing and security guarantees from Washington. It's a risky, opportunistic dance, but it gives them agency. Does this mean America's global leadership is automatically eroding? Not automatically, but it now has to compete for influence every single day. The era of unchallenged primacy is simply over. That's a psychological adjustment the US is still struggling to make. We haven't even mentioned the silent actor in all of this. Taiwan, it's not just an island. It's the ultimate symbol of the unresolved status quo. For China, it's the unfinished civil war and a core matter of national identity. For America, it's a democratic partner and a litmus test for its credibility in Asia. The semiconductor industry just makes the stakes unbearably high. Honestly, could there be a more dangerous flashpoint? The grim reality is that both sides have painted themselves into corners on this issue. Rhetoric has become so hardened that backing down seems politically impossible. This creates a situation where stability depends on things never coming to a head. We're relying on perpetual ambiguity, and that's a fragile foundation. So, is this conflict destined for a hot war? Most analysts still think it's unlikely because the costs are too catastrophic. But unlikely doesn't mean impossible, and the risk is growing. The safer bet is decades of icy, complex rivalry that touches every part of life. You'll feel it in the price of goods, the apps on your phone, and the news you read. This is the defining feature of the 21st century so far. But here's a final crucial point often missed. This isn't a movie with a clear third act climax. There's no inevitable victory or defeat waiting for us. It's a managed condition, a permanent state of pressure we have to learn to live with. The goal is no longer friendship or even true partnership. The goal is to avoid catastrophe while competing fiercely. That's a difficult, exhausting way for nations to coexist. It requires discipline, communication, and a level of mature statecraft we haven't seen yet. The real question now is whether both sides are capable of that maturity. The evidence so far is mixed at best. We are all participants in this global experiment, whether we like it or not. The real reason for the US-China conflict is that the old story ended and a frightening new one began. And we're all still writing the first chapter.